Hi, I'm Brian Buckhalter, NCSM Awards Chairman, and welcome to Learning with Leaders. We're all math people. Thank you for joining me and my co-host, Katie Arrington, NCSM President-elect, as we talk with bold leaders and influencers about their math journeys and contributions. Today, we will hear from our special guest about their inspiration, perceptions, and insights about instructional decisions that make mathematics welcoming and engaging to a broad audience. Listen and learn about how beliefs, practices, and policies must continue to advance to ensure that each and every person sees themselves as a capable and powerful mathematical thinker.
Hello, listeners. I'm Katie Arrington. Welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders. We're continuing our series, We're All Math People, and today's episode is a chat with a dynamic tag team in professional learning. I'd like to introduce you to today's special guests, Dr. Nicora Placa and Tracy Zager. Dr. Nicora Placa is an assistant professor at Hunter College, where she teaches and develops high-quality clinical experiences for pre-service educators, while also conducting research on professional learning. Nicora also continues to work with schools and districts to provide collaborative coaching and professional learning supports for in-service teachers and administrators. She's also the author of a new resource, 6 Tools for Collaborative Mathematics Coaching. Tracy Zager is the author of Becoming the Math Teacher You Wish You'd Had, Ideas and Strategies from Vibrant Classrooms, and is a co-author along with Graham Fletcher of Building Fact Fluency Toolkits. She has edited multiple professional development books for teachers, and she works as a math coach and consultant. Welcome to you both, Nicora and Tracy.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. This is my first podcast ever, so I'm very excited.
Ever? Yay! We're so excited it's with us. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have you both.
So listen, Katie gave us a little insight into some of your current work, but share with our listeners, if you will, a little bit about your backgrounds in teaching that have led to your current contributions.
Sure. So I was an elementary and middle school math teacher in the Bronx in New York, and I absolutely loved teaching math. I never thought I would leave the classroom. I never had any interest in working with adults. I thought I would stay in the classroom forever. But what happens, and I think a lot of coaches can relate to this, is some opportunities start coming your way and you kind of fall into coaching. And for me, it was a very gradual process. First, it was, do you want to mentor some new teachers? I said, sure. Then it was, what about a hybrid role where you get to teach in the morning and coach in the afternoon? I said, sure, as long as I'm still teaching. And it kind of was that. And I found myself liking working with teachers a lot. And I said, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then an opportunity came up for me to work in a brand new school that was opening, a brand new middle school, and be their school-based math coach. And I took that and I just found myself now falling in love with working with teachers and doing professional learning. And so I had the opportunity when I was doing my doctorate to really explore the literature on professional learning, on student learning. And I thought, how unfair is it that I get to sit and read and learn and think for hours in this classroom, and the teachers and coaches and leaders on the ground don't get this work? So I started collaborating with different school districts, with different schools, doing some consulting work, some different professional work, and just building my understanding of coaching and my understanding of what it was like to work with teachers. And then even in my role now at Hunter, I still get to try out new ideas with my pre-service teachers, with the work I do with different districts. And so when Tracy and I were talking about the idea for this book, I said, you know, I've learned so much from all of these coaching experiences I've had. I wish I had this kind of manual or playbook or guide to help me when I was coaching. And so it's just been a wonderful experience to kind of capture all of this work I've done and have been doing or continue to do, and get it into a book. And Tracy has been an instrumental support in doing that and helping me think that through.
I love it. I love how you, like, part of your journey, it really has inspired where you are today. Nice. Tracy, give us a little bit about your background. What does your background look like? What's your teaching history?
So I was a fourth grade teacher. Fourth grade is the best. Let's just get that out in the open. They come in as big little kids and they leave you as little big kids, and it's so fun. And I loved it, and I never want to do anything else.
Right.
And I loved teaching all the subjects. I was an elementary teacher. And toward the end of my time in my district, this was out west, they were kind of helping me become a TOSA, like a math specialist for the district. And I was really excited to do that. I was like on my way to Mount Holyoke for the summer math for teachers, and, just the beginning of really digging into math. And then my husband decided to become a doctor, and we had a cross-country move. And so I had to start all over again in a new community, and I was pregnant. And so I wasn't it was just not a good time to get another classroom job right then. So that's when I started working with pre-service teachers. When my kids were very little and my husband was super busy in medical school. So in Boston, I worked with multiple universities and supported pre-service teachers in a huge variety of schools. And that is when I really began my journey with adult education. And I just learned so much being in and out of these different classrooms. And so then we moved to Maine for residency, and I continued that sort of work up here with the University of Southern Maine. And somewhere in there, I wrote my book, which involved a lot of field work and observation of teachers. And I was headed back to the classroom. That was the plan. As soon as my youngest was in kindergarten, I was planning to recertify and in a new state and teach. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. And at that moment, it was like, I don't think that's in the cards for right now. And so my editor, Toby Gordon, who is has edited most of the math books I love, said, why don't you start editing with me? And so I started working as a freelance editor, but I never wanted to just be an editor all the time. I always wanted to stay connected to schools. So for the next 7 years or so, I had this hybrid life where I edited books for teachers, and then I also coach in buildings. And so I started coaching in a school in New Hampshire, a tiny little school where I learned so much. And then I moved here to Portland to the district level. There's a coach in every building, and then I support those coaches. My older daughter says, you coach coaches on how to teach teachers. There's like a funny sense she says. So I get to be in classrooms. It's a lovely sized district to experiment with, because it's not so big that, I have really great relationships with people, but the schools are so varied. It blows my mind. So it's been fantastic. But during that time, I started reaching out to my professional network around how do I do this? What's the best way to organize resources? How do I support these coaches? Coaching was brand new in our district, and we didn't have a legacy of that. So I was leaning on the Brain Trust, mostly NCSM, frankly, and Elham Kazemi and the rest of the gang from the University of Washington were talking about math labs and how they were coaching, and it was a very different model. And so Nicora and I started talking at the conferences around our personal experiments with coaching and different models. And so the book, in many ways, I think, grew out of those sort of conversations around what are you trying? Here's what's frustrating for me. Here's what's working for me. Here, if there's just one of me, how do I, and the needs are, we have brand new teachers and we have veteran teachers and we have everything in between, how do we do this? And so that informal support of other folks became instrumental in the experiments. And I still view it as an experiment. We're still trying things out here. But Nicora became one of the people I went to all the time around, tell me how you're doing this. And then we shifted to I think it's time to write a book about this, to guide coaches in figuring this out, because coaches can feel pretty isolated, right? If it's a single math coach in a building and you're not sure, do I sit with the teachers at lunch? Do I sit with the principal? That whole the land in between thing that can happen with coaches. So that network of support among coaches and a resource for them became very appealing for us. So, and I'm just thrilled with how it came out. Can't wait for everyone to see it.
I'm inspired by how you took challenges and really made them into opportunities to learn and grow. And I'm also really touched by the partnership that you and Nicora
Yes.
have formed, and how you're learning and growing together with the support of others in the business, as they say.
Yes.
It's
I already get this feel that you practice what you preach.
That's right.
So I'm excited to hear more about this new book.
Yeah, the first 9 copies are going to the coaches I work with because we're going to read it together. That's my
awesome.
prerogative as editor. That's what I want. Because it's the book that we need to read together. It's going to be great.
Awesome.
I hope I'll get to come in and say hello to them, and that would be
That'd be
so
wonderful.
fun.
Can't wait.
Well, so speaking of Nicora, the upcoming book is called 6 Tools for Collaborative Mathematics Coaching. Tell us, what exactly is collaborative coaching, and how might that be similar or different to the individual coaching models that our listeners might be more familiar with?
Sure. So I noticed a big shift, similar to how when I was teaching, I noticed the shift in my teaching practices. I noticed this shift in my coaching. I think when I started coaching, I was a brand new coach. The only coaching model I knew was go into a teacher's classroom, because this is the coaching I had been given, right? Go into a teacher's classroom, watch their lesson, co-plan with them, give them some feedback, come back, these kind of coaching cycles. And I think there's a lot of value in that type of coaching model. And I still do a lot of that work with teacher teams. But for me, when I started to see a shift was when I started to play with some of these more collaborative learning opportunities, right? So really working alongside teams, creating learning opportunities for the team to grow together, and also positioning myself as a learner alongside them, right? I'm not here as the expert to come and tell you this is what you should do or this is what you have to do, but like we're learning together about students and about how they think, and really foregrounding student thinking in all of our work so that we could learn together how to better support our students. And so the tools that came out of that were just different structures that allowed me to do some of those things. So for example, student interviews, right? They really allowed us as a team to bring a student in to our department meeting or our PD time and say, let's have the student work on a problem and let's ask them questions and let's together think about what we could learn about how students are thinking about fractions or algebra or operations with numbers. And together we got to do that and experience that learning and construct our kind of new knowledge as a team. And that was a really powerful shift I saw in the school, right? In the school or the district, right? We're kind of making changes that way, but also individually, and teachers they started to make changes as they were participating in this and they were learning and they were developing their understanding. And so I think of it the way I think of a classroom, right? There are times when you want to work one-on-one with a student, and that's really important. And that's what individual coaching does. And then there's times when we want to orchestrate a whole class discussion and we want to really get like all of the ideas out there and have conversation and develop knowledge as a group. And so to me, they play really nicely together, and you just have to look at your context and the needs of, the learners in your school and figure out how you're going to help those work together.
Oh, I think it's so important that we have these tools to help us navigate this journey and this path of supporting others. Hearing Tracy talk about how her daughter interprets her work, that she's a coach of the coaches of the teacher of the teachers, I want to go back. I want to backtrack just a little bit. Often successful math teachers are often the ones selected to become these math coaches, but they aren't always supported in making the transition to adult education and really understanding the coach's role. What can new coaches bring from their experiences in the classroom, and what new learning and ways of thinking are in store for them looking forward?
It's a great question. I think when I started really reflecting on my coaching, I thought about that question a lot, which was, what do I know about how young people learn? What do I know from my time in the classroom about what young people learn? And I think new coaches bring that. They know a lot about learning, right? So they know, let's take an example, they know students need opportunities to create their own understanding of something, right? It doesn't work when you stand up and you tell them, step one, you do this, step two, you do this, step three, you do this. So how do we translate when we work with teachers? Well, maybe it's not going to work if I stand up and do a PD and say, we're all going to do number talks. And step one is you're going to put the number talk on the board horizontally. And step two is you're going to solicit answers. Maybe we need to construct our own understanding of why we use number talks, why number talks are important, what it looks like when we practice a number talk. Can we rehearse it together and develop some understanding of those different ideas? And so I think there's so many ideas. I go through a bunch of them in the beginning of the book. Another one that comes to mind is I knew from my work in classrooms, students need to take risks. They need to be able to try out new ideas, to have opportunities to make mistakes, and it's okay. Are we giving our teachers that opportunity when we go in and we're doing a learning block? Are the teachers nervous because if they make a mistake, I'm viewed by my colleagues and by my coach as, you know, not a good teacher, right? Or do I feel comfortable, right? Do I feel comfortable saying, hey, I did this lesson today, everyone, and it bombed. No one understood. I thought it was great. I went in. Are they comfortable taking that risk and coming to a meeting and saying, can you guys help me? Can we talk about this? How do I create those opportunities? And so I think when we think about what worked in terms of learning with our students, we can transfer some of those ideas over.
Listening to you talk, Nicora, I'm just, the shift in the work that I've been doing using these ideas that I've learned from you and others, it's so profound. It takes that evaluative, judgmental, are you secretly telling the principal about me? All those things that are traps for coaches, it just takes them away. And I always think of it as like a pulling alongside. Instead of sitting across the table from the teacher, you're now on the same side of the table together investigating student thinking. And all the way through the book, she talks about it's really about getting people curious about student thinking. And then you can create these collaborative moments where we're all investigating that together. And it just changes the entire dynamic of a school to not have that kind of, you come in as the expert and you're taking notes on them, criticizing them, giving them, 3 glows and a grow or whatever, to a shift of we're all in this together. We're going to make mistakes together. We're going to figure it out together. And it can really shift how people feel about coming to work and having colleagues that are in the practice with them. And the coach is the one kind of facilitating and engineering so much of that.
Love that. I love the idea of working together as a team, learning together as a team, and just being curious. I love the framing of being curious about student thinking to serve them better.
Yes.
And working together collaboratively to do that. It's so much easier to be curious with a group, right? To discuss what you're observing and what it means to you when you have partners in crime, right? When you're working.
I think when you can get that curiosity fostered, and I think the student interviews, tool number 2 does that really well. But when we can create that curiosity, that's when I feel like, okay, the door's open. We can now try right? Because we're really curious and we want to know more. And now when we go into a classroom, that's the lens we're using. When we're planning a lesson, that's the lens we're using. That curiosity about student thinking is such a key part. And it's how I feel successful as a coach sometimes too. When a teacher sends me a text or sends me an email and says, hey, this student did something really cool today, and I don't know how to think about it. Can you brainstorm with me? That's when I feel successful. I used to feel successful when they would say, hey, do you have any resources on this? And I still feel like, okay, great. I have a relationship. They're asking me for resources. But when they want to share their student thinking and share student work with me, that's what makes me feel like, okay, we're making progress. We're moving along. We're gonna do great things in this school or this district.
And I love that as a metric of success. And the other one that I think about a lot is when you find out that they're planning together without you as the coach, when it like that collaborative thing has taken over, and whether you're kind of quote unquote like on a cycle or off a cycle with a particular team, they're still meeting and planning and saying, what do we think students might do with this? Or let's dig into the math together, or let's just put our heads together. That is I get like a fist pump.
I think also the tools provide a structure for teachers to do that, right? So once
Yes.
I've introduced student interviews to a team, or I've introduced lesson study to a team, they might say, hey, we were in a department meeting. We noticed students really struggled with this assessment on integers. And we're wondering, next time you're here, can we do some student interviews just to see why they got these questions, what they're struggling with? Or, hey, can we do a lesson study? We're about to start a new unit. We're not sure what manipulative to use when we start fractions. Could we do a lesson study? And it gives them a tool to talk about things too, right? So they have a structure now that I can use, that we've created together and we feel comfortable with, to help them develop their understanding. And then it's driven by them. They have the agency. I think particularly right now for teachers, they feel so much agency has been taken away from them, and
Yes.
particularly in their own learning. So for me, like, my goal is always honor, as a coach, you need to honor the experiences and the expertise that people are bringing into a situation, so that we learn together. It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's not right. It's because we're learning. We're always learning, and we're learning together. So
I really love that. In my work with teachers, we always talk about using structures and kind of having routines for conversations, because then it allows us to focus on what we're doing, right? So lesson study gives you a way to kind of dig in and talk about the things that really matter. It's not about the structure, but the structure allows you to have those deep conversations. So actually, that leads me to my next question, which is, tell us a little bit more about the tools. You've mentioned student interviews and you've mentioned lesson study. We're talking about these things as tools, but what does it really mean to be a tool for a math coach? And what are the tools like in the book?
yeah. So I think of them almost as a pedagogical strategy for a coach, right? Like, this is a strategy I'm going to use as a coach to work with a team to foster these learning opportunities. And so there's 6 of them. The first one I think is like essential for the other 5 to work. And the first one is building teams and fostering a learning community. And I think we know this from our work in classrooms. We know this from our work in schools with teachers. If we don't have a strong learning community, it's going to be very hard to implement the other tools. So depending what type of coach you are, I mean, the thing that's so hard about coaching is it's not one size fits all. There are so many different types of coaching. There are so many different roles you could have. You need to think about your team and where they are and how you're positioned. You may already be positioned as a learner alongside them, and maybe you don't need to do as much work for building a learning community. Or you may be walking into a brand new district and you don't know anyone, and you don't know how they work together, and you don't know what their experience has been with coaches before. So I think that's a really important foundational piece that needs to be there. So then the second tool is student interviews, which we talked a little bit about. The third is visiting classrooms and developing your lens as a coach, so that you start to see like how you're viewing classrooms, and are you looking at student thinking, right? Because sometimes before we take teachers on learning walks, we need to make sure like we're going into classrooms and we're really focusing in on what students are doing instead of what the teacher is doing, right? And that's a shift for some of us. It was certainly a shift for me. I had always focused on like, the teacher is doing this really cool thing on the board. And now I look at, oh, wow, this kid is doing this really cool thing on their paper. And that shift, I think, is really important. And then the fourth is learning walks, which is taking teams of teachers into different classrooms with a kind of goal of looking at a certain thing about student learning. The fifth is rehearsing routines. So taking a routine like a number talk, or a which one doesn't belong, or a how many, and saying, let's try that out. Let's rehearse it together and see how it goes. And then let's rehearse it with our kids and practice it. And routines, like you said before, are really nice ways for us to have a structure, and that can fit all different content. So if you're working in a K-5 or K-8 school, you can use a routine across those grades. And then the last is lesson study, which I think requires a lot of trust amongst the team. And I would recommend it. I would recommend maybe trying some of the other tools out before you jump into that. But lesson study has been very powerful for me with schools I've worked with.
Look, I'm looking at Katie. We're both about to jump in on that one.
We cut each other off. You guys, I feel like I'm learning so much just from this conversation and really thinking about coaching and structures and the different tools that you're providing in the new publication that we can't wait to come out. So just really quickly, because we are in our math series, we're all math people. How do you think this collaborative coaching helps educators, students, the people that are connected to those folks, their parents, the communities? How do you think this contributes to really allowing people to see themselves as a math person?
Great question. You know, I can't tell you how many students I have, how many pre-service teachers I have that come to me and say at the beginning of the semester, I'm not a math person. And I talk with them and I find out, oh, wow, this student owns a cupcake business, right? She owns a cupcake business where she's baking cupcakes every day, but she thinks she's not a math person because of the narrative that she's told herself and the narrative she's been told by others about what it means to be a math person. And I think my goal when I work with coaches and with teachers and with students is really to change that narrative, right? How do we all think of ourselves as we're all math people, right? How do we really change that narrative? And what messages are we sending or receiving that are contributing to that? And so I think that would be a really interesting idea for a team to explore. Like, what if we interviewed a bunch of kids, right? We brought them in and we said, do you think you're a math person? Why or why not? What if we like let them talk about that and then thought about, reflected as a team, what are we doing that might create that narrative that the student is telling themselves, and what could we do differently? And then maybe we could explore some of the literature on that. Maybe we could explore some of the strategies we could use. But I think like that's a perfect example of how we could use one of these tools to address something that we all want our students to come out of our class saying, I love math. Math is the greatest thing ever. So that's one way a tool could be used to kind of help explore that issue.
Awesome.
I feel like this question is like the central organizing question of my adult working life. Like literally everything I work on is about this question because teachers are the products of our educational system, and what was done to them, just like every other, most other citizens, is created this belief that they're not math people. And that is tragic and makes me want to cry. And so the only way we're ever going to break that cycle, because if you think you're not a math person and you're also a math teacher, you're going to be passing that kind of messaging along to kids, whether you want to or not. There's actually really interesting research about that, about the messages kids pick up from teachers who have negative feelings about math. So I care about it for the students, but I also just care about it for the teachers and how they see themselves. And frankly, this all started with my mom and how she saw herself as not a math person because of what her dad said to her when she was 12 and she was struggling with algebra. And he said, you don't think right. And it became core of how she saw herself was I'm someone who can't do math. And so the only way I know to break that cycle is to do what Nicora is describing here, which is to create these safe and like to co-construct a safe place, not just say this is a safe place, but to through this shared experience of working and risking and learning and growing together, and you build this trust, then you can engage in exploration of the math because you're investigating a student thinking about the math. And these moments can happen where teachers start to they feel that fear, but then they get curious and then they get interested and then they start realizing, oh, their strategy was actually kind of neat. And, they were going to do it in a different way. And you start to see a difference in how people literally walk and feel about themselves and how they feel when they come in the room. And so it is very personal, very relationship-based, long-term work. It's never a quick fix. You have to build that trust and sustain those relationships, but it is the most rewarding part of my job, frankly, is when you see this turn in someone who has for 20 or 30 or 40 years thought that they were stupid in some very specific way that our society values as smart. and they come to realize that that's all, backwards, and that's not true, and that they have a ton to offer, and so do all their students. That's what keeps me coming back to this work over and over again. I think that's the coach's privilege, is to bear witness to that growth, and to try to create conditions for that to happen. And so using the tools to create those conditions, having that structure, I have found to be really powerful in my practice too.
I love that. I was actually in a webinar earlier today where we were talking about building trust and, getting people really interested in STEM. And one of the other people on the webinar said, we just have to shift our mindset to recognize the genius is in the room, right? The educators, the students, the genius is there. We just have to figure out how to tap into it. And I love the use of tools to get at that, and the use of relationships and building of trust. It's just all very inspirational. Thank you for sharing those thoughts.
Oh, yes, this is great. We want to thank you both for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. But before we leave, I know our listeners want to know, how can they keep up with you and all of your work, and especially how to find this new book, The 6 Tools for Collaborative Mathematics Coaching. So, Tracy, will you tell our listeners how can they follow you and your work?
Sure. For the moment, I'm still on Twitter. We have to see what's going to happen with Mr. Musk and what he's doing to it, but that Bluebird is still where I'm at. And then there's some community Facebook groups that I'm part of. Facebook I like a little less, but I'm there. And I do have a website I should dust off and refresh, but it's got some info about my book. And then the Building Fact Fluency community is a good place to find me. And then I just want to say Nicora's book we don't have the exact publication date because of these changes in supply, but it is coming out before the end of the school year. Should be coming out maybe about when this podcast comes out. We don't know exactly, but in this spring. So that you'll be able to find at stenhouse.com, and also on Amazon and everywhere else that you can buy books. And you can actually pre-order it now. The pre-order link is live on Amazon.
Awesome. Yes.
And Nicora,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Nicora, where can we find you?
You can also find me on Twitter for now. It's at Nicora Placa. And I also have a website, nicoraplaca.com, which also has a kind of companion website. If you do nicoraplaca.com/6tools, you can start to see some of the resources that accompany the different tools in the book. But we are so excited to chat with anyone as they're reading the book on Twitter, through the website. Really, I think coaching can be lonely. So it's nice to have a community to be able to talk to, and CSM does that for us. And we hope the book can also be part of that community.
Nice. Well, thank you, ladies, again so much for joining us today. Don't forget to go and pick up your copy of 6 Tools for Collaborative Mathematics Coaching today.
We'll make sure all of the Twitter handles and Facebook groups and webinars and websites and those kinds of things are in the notes about the episode. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks, listeners. We'll catch you next month.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
We hope that you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation and will tune into our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. You can learn more about NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education, and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website, mathedleadership.org. You can also follow NCSM on Twitter at mathedleaders and using the hashtag NCSMBold. Until next time.